Welcome back. We are following market reaction on the heels of remarks from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He told the Economic Club of Chicago that tariffs were much larger than anticipated and they will lead to higher inflation. If you missed that yesterday, here it is.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent.
Now, many say those remarks from Powell are his starkest warning yet. It even led to losses yesterday in the stock market. And if you look at the Dow Jones right now, it's down. Now, we know today President Trump is responding. He said, quote, "The European Central Bank is expected to cut interest rates for the 7th time, and yet too late." Jerome Powell of the Fed, who is always too late and wrong, yesterday issued a report which was another and typical complete mess. Trump ends the post with Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. Let's get to CBS News MoneyWatch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, good to see you today. First off, can you just clear things up for us? Can the Fed chair be terminated? And secondly, do we know why Powell hasn't cut interest rates just yet?
Okay, so let's start with the termination point. So technically, no. It would be illegal for the president to fire Chair Powell without cause. And cause is generally accepted to be something other than, I don't like your monetary policy. So based on what the president has said thus far, most people that I'm talking to don't see that there would be an argument for cause. What's really interesting is if you go back to Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, there was a Supreme Court case. It was Humphrey's Executor versus the United States. And that particular case sort of set the precedent that the president does not have the legal authority to boot the head of the FTC or of the Federal Reserve out of this. Now, there is a court case that is coming up in the Supreme Court this session, actually, and something in terms of how it might come out could impact the president's power to do that. But as of now, no, the president cannot do that. To your second question about why Powell has not cut interest rates, the data hasn't said that essentially we need to. I mean, remember, going back to September, October, we did see interest rate cuts. We actually saw a full percentage point cut over a number of different meetings. And then the Fed has held interest rates steady because there was actually a little bit of an uptick in inflation. Only over the past 2 months have we seen inflation come down a little bit. And there's just this wild card with tariffs. And so Fed Chair Powell has been in very much a wait and see mode as opposed to cutting and then getting into a situation where you do see tariffs increase prices and you don't have that tool at your ready.
Right. And that makes sense. Once you explain it, it really does make sense. We know Powell is concerned tariffs will cause stagflation. Can you explain to us what stagflation is and why it's a threat to the economy?
Yeah. So yesterday in Chair Powell's comments, he highlighted that we could see high inflation and high unemployment. And that is pretty much the main reason why the market sold off in such a dramatic fashion while he was talking. And that is essentially the definition of stagflation. It's when you have inflation that is continuing to creep up, but you also have high unemployment and you have economic growth that is really slowing down. And what's really tough about that situation is that the Federal Reserve utilizes interest rates as a tool to keep those two in check. If you cut interest rates, it spurs growth, it spurs people to go out and buy, they have more money, it's easier to borrow. But that will often raise prices. So if you do that in a situation where you already have high inflation, that's really, really tough. And it essentially doesn't create a good situation. So that's why there's so much concern that if we were to get into a place where you do have high inflation and high unemployment and low growth, there's very little tools that the Fed can use in order to get us out of that situation.
So all of that considered, on the other hand, we know the European Central Bank, they announced not long after Trump's social media post that it has in fact decided to cut interest rates. What prompted their decision?
It's really the trade sort of tensions. I was listening to Christine Lagarde, who is the head of the ECB, talk about this and talk about this decision. And she said it was unanimous because of all of the uncertainty that they are seeing when it comes to these tariffs and sort of the reordering of the global trade landscape. I will note that the European Union is in a bit of a different situation economically. They have been cutting rates more recently than the U.S. They've been trying to spur some economic growth. The U.S. still has solid fundamentals, so I don't think you would necessarily see that decision impact Fed Chair Powell in May or June.
Okay. I want to ask you about Meta's ongoing antitrust trial because former Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, she is back on the stand today. What have we heard from her so far?
So seconds ago, actually, she just wrapped up her testimony, and it was pretty similar to Mark Zuckerberg in terms of what she was presented with. There were a number of emails and correspondence going back during her time, of course, as COO of Facebook, Meta, later on. And we really heard that same push of, well, Instagram wouldn't have been Instagram without Meta, that flat out they did not buy Instagram in order to kill this or to create a monopoly. It was as you would expect. There wasn't as much sort of juicy reveal in terms of those emails as we saw during the Zuckerberg part of the testimony, but certainly a lot more folks that we're going to hear from going forward over the next few weeks, Mugo.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Lastly, Kelly, one last question for you. Some breaking news here. A federal judge just handed Google a major legal loss. What are we talking about there?
So this is the second major legal loss for Alphabet Google in the past few months or so. I want to make sure I get this right. This is about their ad market. So a judge in Virginia ruled that Google unlawfully monopolized markets for publisher ad servers and the market for ad exchanges. Kind of basically just to break that down, they're saying that they have a monopoly in the online ad market. And that's the second judge that has ruled this. Why this is important is ad revenue for Google Online. I mean, that's a huge part of their business when it comes to search and just sort of giving them all of that firepower to invest in other places. And you could see a judge rule that they might have to break up their company. So, of course, this is also what Meta is looking at. Now, there is no ruling in terms of what remedy for this particular ruling or the previous one, but just the fact that they're now facing two rulings that they have a monopoly in the ad market, it's not good news for Google right now.
Yeah, not at all. Kelly O'Grady, as always, thank you so much for helping us break all of that down. Appreciate your time.